Sometimes I wish I was a fan. Trench era, it just seems like such a vibe. I wonder if we'll get a Trench anniversary surprise. I really hope that they do something for the Trench anniversary. I'll be curious to see what happens in 2028, because in a lot of ways, 2028 is my best guess for when they will release their next album. Kind of they'll finish out festivals this year, take 2027 largely off, and then start working on an album at the tail end of the year, and then release it in 2028 at some point. I don't know if that's actually what's going to happen. They might just completely take 2027 off and then come back 2029. Just given sort of the trajectory of things in the past, I wouldn't be surprised if 2028 is when we get their new album. But then that October is the anniversary of Trench, the 10-year anniversary of Trench, which is crazy. I mean, it's 2.5 years off. But yeah, so I'll be curious. I really hope we get something for that anniversary. I was technically a fan just before Trench came out. I do wish I could go back in time and be as invested as I am now and kind of follow the whole rollout of that album, the release of the cryptic files, the uncovery of dema.org, all that kind of stuff. I think that would have been really cool to experience. But 21pilots would work with Billie Eilish on a song. That could be interesting. I mean, it's certainly, well, I don't know. See, I've only ever been the most casual of all casual followers of Billie Eilish, but I certainly got the impression that her early work was more similar to something like what 21pilots does, and her more recent stuff, while still stylistically similar in terms of delivery, content-wise, is not really along the same lines. Like, I kind of wonder if that moment has passed at this point. Billie Eilish is a 21pilots fan. Well, yeah, I mean, I figured she would be. Like, I'm not opposed to that kind of collaboration. I just do wonder if it fully works now to have them work on a song together. They have different record labels, so maybe the collab wouldn't work. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I don't know a ton about the music industry and how that kind of stuff works. I think there is cross-label collaboration from time to time, or maybe even fairly often. I think honestly the hesitation would come not so much from the record label, because it would be a good, I think they would both kind of help that song and release perform really well. I think from a label perspective, they would be all for it, unless there was some dispute over rights or something like that. But I think the hesitation would more come from 21pilots themselves, because they don't do a ton of collaborations at all. It might have been more likely that they would have done that in 2018 or 2019, but she perhaps wasn't quite big enough yet. I don't know. Or she wasn't interested. Or they weren't, I think always as a default, they're just not interested in doing collabs. But I think that kind of would have been the peak moment to have that happen in terms of content. They had a performance with the VMAs. Yeah, but that's like, one, that's not something they do a ton of to begin with. But two, even that wasn't a released song. That was a performance at an award show where they work together. I'm curious about getting into physical media because I think it's awesome, but I'm not sure if I want to get into CDs or vinyls. It depends what your purpose is for getting physical media, because I think CDs are easier if you want to get into physical media because of having access to listen to them a lot, whereas I usually just get both, but I like displaying vinyls a lot, even though I don't play them a ton because my record player is broken. So I like getting the CDs to have the CD quality, to be able to play the CDs physical, the physical CD, rather than having to worry about streaming and internet and that kind of stuff. But then I much prefer having vinyls to display, because I think they're really good, kind of just pieces of art to put up. Playing vinyls is a more complicated thing than playing CDs, right? You generally have to, if you want it to sound really good, you have to invest in a good quality record player, and that's not as common as having a CD player sitting around. Most, CD players are easier to find. Sometimes computers have them. Get a pretty cheap CD drive. There isn't a ton of difference in quality between a cheap CD drive and a really expensive one. Also, like PlayStations typically have a ability to play CDs and things like that. So it's just a lot easier to actually have the access to play a CD as opposed to something like a vinyl. I'm all for playing and listening to vinyls, and certainly if you think it's going to be worth the time investment and stuff to get that set up, just not egregious. It's just more than a CD. That would be the way to go. But it really depends. If you're like, primarily, I want to have easy access to my music that I want to own offline without having to worry about streaming, and I want it to be better quality than streaming, but I don't care a ton about the whole vinyl experience or having something to put up as an art piece, I might opt for go for CDs. But it also depends. Certain things like the location sessions are only on vinyl. So I wonder what leads Clancy to start Vialism in the first place. Does Clancy start Vialism in the first place? I mean, that's an interesting question, right? I mean, the implications of sort of looking at not just the Nova Bishop, but all the Nikos before that as failed Clancy's who failed breaking out of the cycle and then became Nico, could lead us all the way back to a starting point where Clancy's kind of at the initial beginnings of this. And then it goes, Clancy becomes Blurryface, becomes Nico. And then a new Clancy appears, starts a cycle, becomes a bishop. So did that initial Clancy institute Vialism, or was it Clancy who has become Nico instituting Vialism in the first place? Right? Did the first Clancy hijack the religion? Maybe. But I think in a lot of ways, the first Clancy came to dema, or founded dema. This is all purely speculation. There's nothing in the history of dema that we've been given in the letters or anything that backs this up. But one possible way to imagine this is Clancy's in dema. There's a group of people. It's a little leaderless. We know he's tempted by control, and he succumbs to that temptation. So he takes over dema. He's corrupted by that power. He becomes Nico, Blurryface, hijacks the religion in place, institutes Vialism. He becomes this evil, corrupt leader. A new Clancy springs up to take him down. That's sort of a way of understanding the beginnings of this. And maybe even understanding that Clancy arrived, that initial Clancy, the one that turns evil and institutes Vialism, arrived with a number of other people onto this continent, founded dema. Clancy becomes a bishop, he brings some other bishops with him, and take this hope that they have, and they kind of present it to the people who came to dema with them and founded dema. Again, pure speculation. There's no real indication of this. There's references of people arriving at dema and hope being presented to them by the bishops, but what that actually looks like, who knows? But in that sort of context, the bishops present this hope. It's like, oh, let us take charge. Let us lead this city that we've all arrived at together. We'll be the leaders because we have this vision in place that's going to be really good for us. And then they take whatever the religion of that community was and hijack it and turn it into Vialism and institute this kind of control over everyone. Did the Banditos create the original religion before being banned from the city? Maybe. I don't know. I think the original religion, is something that kind of existed before dema existed in the way that we know it. I think it's much older than a lot of that. He seems to be becoming less cryptic. Yeah, so I think now that the story has ended, and it really has ended now that Dragpath is out, more and more over the next few years, I would not be surprised if we start seeing more interviews like this where he becomes less cryptic and starts saying upfront more things about creation of the story, what different things mean in the story. He kind of already said he's going to be more upfront in Clancy. That wasn't quite true, but in some ways it was. And certainly now that the whole story's been wrapped up, I think he's going to be a lot more upfront, a lot more clear about some of this stuff. Twin Pilots, the animated series, is my biggest wish. Interesting. I don't know. I think I would like a live action one. I think it depends how they do the animation, because I think they would have to animate it in a very particular way. It could work very well, but there's something about the sort of atmosphere of dema that they've already captured through a live action visual media that might be hard to translate into animation in the same way.